This is our first HUPO ECR webinar. We are grateful and excited to host two Taylor and Francis Commission editors, Reegan Burnell-Clarke and Olivia Clavis. Thank you so much to accept the invitation today and be here with us. Reegan will be our speaker today. His presentation title is Maximizing the Impact of Your Abstract and Keywords. And Olivia will join us for the exciting Q&A questions. Please feel free to write your questions in the Q&A chat box during the conference. After that, we can discuss and learn more about this exciting topic. Just a little bit to get familiar with our editor's background and all biography of them, starting with Reegan, has worked in scientific publishing for around 4 years. He previously worked at Frontiers as a journal specialist, managing article collections and supporting guest editors with engaging authors to submit their papers. At Taylor and Francis, Reegan has worked on the expert collection for both expert review of hematology and expert review of cardiovascular therapy. His role ranged from identifying and commissioning high-quality authors, supporting them from submission to publication, and working alongside with experts in their field to develop journals. Reegan has led multiple webinar and conference talks for early career researchers on how to develop impactful publications for the right audience. And with Olivia, she has worked in scientific publishing for around 8 years. She worked at Elsevier as a journal manager, managing manuscripts from submission to the final version of record. At Taylor and Francis, Liv has worked as a publisher on their obstetric and gynecology list before moving over the expert collection, where she is a commissioning editor on one HUPO affiliated title, Expert Review at Proteomics. Liv has a good understanding both of what peer reviewers want to see and how a good abstract and considered choice of keywords can have an impact on search engine optimization to reach the right audience. Then I will leave the floor to Reegan to start, and please feel free to ask a question on the chat.
Yeah, perfect. All right. Yeah, thank you for the introduction there. Hope that everyone can see this here. So yeah, I am Reegan Burnell-Clarke, commissioning editor with Taylor and Francis. And today, just going to go through how we can best maximize the impact of abstracts and keywords. So to begin with, just a little bit of an overview when it comes to actually writing your title, your abstract, and your keywords. Realistically, this is the first thing that people will see when they come across your article. So they'll typically look at the title first, and then secondary, they'll have a little look at the abstract. So overall, this kind of does act as a bit of a shop window for what your article is going to say, what it's going to cover, and potentially even the conclusions that you may reach. And this really does help individuals to actually identify, is this a paper that I'm going to read? Is this even potentially, before reading it, something that I may include in my literature review or even need to actually cite within my research? So a great way to kind of begin when looking at your title and abstract is, before you even start this, is actually looking at what keywords you're going to use. Kind of in the modern world of publishing, a lot of actually getting a good bit of outreach of your paper, getting it in front of the right people, it does often come down to the keywords, which words will be picked up in web searches, which words might be searched when people are doing literature reviews. And in a way, when you are looking at how to best write your title and abstract, you almost need to think of it more as if you were in like a marketing kind of mindset as opposed to a scientific one. But that is not to say that you do still need to be very accurate in what you're actually writing and the information you're putting forwards. So when it does come down to these keywords, kind of a very effective checklist that I would say to look through to begin with is once you have written your paper. So typically these are the last things you'll do. And what I must add here is a lot of people typically will undervalue the impact their title, their abstract, and even their keywords may have on their overall paper. Quite commonly in publishing, I do come across quite a few papers that have very good messages, very good conclusions, but unfortunately, the impact is diminished by the fact that the titles are a bit mixed. They may include a lot of filler words. The keywords may be just kind of last minute, very much just there to fill the gap, the same as the abstract, really, where they put the majority of focus on the actual work itself. So what I would say is once you've written your entire paper, it's very good to go through your paper and just highlight kind of what you think would be the key words, key terms. At this stage, it's just about highlighting anything you think is important. And then over the kind of working through this, you start to narrow down. So potentially start searching a few of your key terms, start thinking to yourself, if I was doing a literature review or if I was going to look at what I'm going to work on next, what would I search? What would I be looking up? Which terms would I be including in kind of my research methodology? And these are very much the kind of key terms, small phrases that you may want to include in your keywords list, which then also needs to then be worked into your title and your abstract itself. So when it comes to your title, this again, something a lot of people do very much undervalue. It's both there to show what your research is about, but also very much to grasp the reader's interest, to very much get people to want to click on your article, to want to read through, to even want to just engage with it if it does come up in online forums. So very much a well-written title should be very concise, accurate, informative, should cover everything the article is about in as very few words kind of as you can. So another checklist to kind of implement into your workflow here is very much when you're using these keywords to try and get them as early into the title as possible. So when you search something in your search engine, typically you'll only be able to see the first 65 characters within a title. So very much if you are doing very quick searches, that's where these keywords, these impactful words need to be. Another thing is very much making it understandable to people that may not be experts in your specific niche. So certain fields, they may be kind of be broken down into many different parts, but if you make your title very much too niche, then you may put certain people off. They may not really understand what your article is going to be about. They may not understand that actually your paper may be useful for them to read just because they may be put off by certain words. So an example here, one of the journals I primarily work on is involved in cardiology. So HFPEF, some people that may mean nothing. To cardiologists, that may mean heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, which is very much, again, a reason why you should try and have the full terms to make it so that individuals can come across this, and also means that when people search for things, it's more likely to be picked up for those terms. As I mentioned earlier, kind of keep away from some of the filler words at the start. So some examples just here. And yeah, your title should just be very clear, very obvious as to what you're going to cover. So here is an example from the expert collection. So we've got tau proteoforms of plasma biomarkers in Alzheimer's disease, mechanism measurements, and medicine. What I've done here is I've given the list of keywords, as you can see highlighted in blue, that I've also then highlighted in the title. So you can very much see right at the start, we have multiple keywords, very much allowing this to easily be understood, easily come up when searched. And I've also underlined the first 65 characters. So you can see these keywords all are within that character limit. And kind of what falls outside of that are just some basic kind of additions to the title. So very much, again, keep your keywords, keep the terms you believe are going to be search most, the terms that you believe will be most impactful very much at the start of your title. So the next stage then is actually putting together your abstract. So as I mentioned earlier, once you've managed to hook people with your title, they're going to start reading into your abstract a bit. So this here is very much where it's your job to actually convince people to want to read your full article, to convince people that they may want to have a look into figures you produce, tables you produce, and also just your conclusions themselves. This is where you're convincing people that your research is worth reading, worth citing. And when you are kind of putting your abstract together, it's very much worth asking yourself, what would make me want to read this further? If I read this abstract, does this encourage me to want to read further? Does this make me want to stop reading the rest of the abstract? You might give up halfway through. Does this make me want to just not bother reading the rest of the paper? So very much you should be asking questions to yourself whilst doing this. So when you're actually doing your abstract, you need have a few key goals that you really want to hit here. So these are again kind of making sure that it describes what methods you're using and make sure that you're so if you do, for example, a literature review, very much actually shows what you've searched. So very clear terms. Here I've given an example of the time that you searched until and a term. Also very concise information of what conclusions you've reached. And again, when you are putting together this abstract, if depending on the journal, you should also have a quick look into what requirements they have for abstracts. Some journals will just have a very open kind of include what you want in your abstract. Others have word limits. And for us at the Expert Collection, we do also like to break down our abstracts into specific sections. So for a review paper, it'll be an introduction, areas covered, and an expert opinion. Just very much helps signpost what you're going to find within the paper. And finally, just with an abstract, it does need to be accurate, needs to be concise. Overall, we're not going to be discussing everything in it because we have a very limited amount of words and characters, but it very much needs to be very self-contained. So another checklist that you can kind of implement here is very much self-contained, similar to the title, try and avoid abbreviations, try and avoid including things in footnotes, avoid including referencing, and it just really needs to be making sense all by itself. When it comes to those keywords that I mentioned earlier, try to get as many of these in as you can, but just make sure that it actually flows naturally still. We don't want it to just sound kind of like you are just trying to hit key points to make it seem impressive and to seem like you are just kind of trying to, I guess, trying to make things come up in internet searches, but it just needs to have that natural flow, make it seem like it's an actual paragraph still. Kind of going along with the self-contained, trying to avoid any technical terminology, avoid anything that's going to need a kind of a whole paragraph to describe what that is itself. Depending on the journal, certain journals may include alternative options, so maybe some graphical abstract, they produce show you abstract is using a couple of images, some allow some videos, some allow various other ways as well. So definitely check with journals because this can definitely improve the outreach of your paper. As I mentioned earlier, research articles, very much we're looking to describe what the objectives are, what the outcomes and the results are. Whereas if you are producing, say, some original research, typically you'd want to very much have what your methods are, the procedures, the results. Usually also include a few like bits of data here that back up the claims you have made. So what I've got here is just an example of a title, an abstract, and keywords. Again, what I've done is I've highlighted what the key terms, keywords are here. So we've got modeling malaria, immunity, protected travelers, optimal control, cost effectiveness analysis. These very much, again, are within the title. A lot of them are very early on. Within the abstract, these come up quite frequently, dotted through the entire abstract. And then we also have just the list of keywords at the bottom here. So what this can really do to make your research as impactful as possible is what I have here is just a few examples just searched in Google Scholar of some of these keywords. So we've got the first one, malaria, immunity, cost effective, very kind of typical things you may search if you're looking at if you're someone that works with vaccines, malaria, and also public health, wanting it to be cost effective. Here, just those three keywords being searched allows that work to come up first in the search results. The second just set of those keywords makes it come up second, and just a third combination, common combination of keywords again comes up fourth. So very much by really tailoring your title, tailoring your abstract, tailoring your keywords, and thinking, are these things I would search? Are these things that I would look for? And kind of not making this a very last minute, kind of trying to cram it into a short space of time and really putting some work into this, it does allow your research to kind of come out more at the top of the pile compared to work where people have done this very last minute, not really focused on this. So yeah, they are kind of a breakdown of just what the best things, best practices when it comes to doing your title abstract keywords are. So now we're just going to move on to a kind of question and answers part where myself, Liv, are going to just answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Yes, thank you so much, Regan, for your talk. It was really impressive and interesting. The advice on the different tips to us consider when we are doing our abstract and title. I was wondering to, break the ice because I think sometimes the audience is a little bit shy. I don't know why, because we cannot even see your faces. Then please take this opportunity to clear all your questions and doubts about this. There is a highly difficult topic for us, at least for me as a researcher. But I was wondering, from editor perspective, how much can a strong title on abstract influence the initial impression of a submission before the peer review process?
Yeah, so very much from that editor perspective, I would say that having good abstract, good title keywords does definitely make a bit of a difference before peer review because very much depending on the journal, the initial editor that may, I guess, screen the article to begin with actually has that option of sending your paper to peer review, potentially rejecting it from the journal, potentially sending it to another journal within the remit of that publisher. So, kind of very similar to trying to, I guess, hook other researchers into wanting to read. It's the same thing with editors in chief, that you want them to have that initial bit of interest in wanting to read a bit deeper into your paper, to wanting to look at the abstract in more detail. And very much again with the kind of abstract, as I mentioned about it being accurate as to what your paper portrays. This is another thing that if you might potentially have some inconsistencies within your abstract, have some incorrect information, this can raise some concerns with an editor that may potentially prevent them sending it to peer review. So yeah, very much a good title, a strong abstract that's accurate whilst also being interesting, very much does can very much sway an editor's opinion to begin with on a paper.
Just
Yeah.
to add what, oh, sorry.
Yeah. Sorry.
That's all right. Yeah, I just thought as well to add when, when an editor is looking at a paper, they're looking at the novelty of it. And if the abstract is strongly showing an aspect of novelty that's not in current research, that's going to boost your chance of being sent to peer review. So if there is a novel aspect, that's important to include in the abstract. But also, I suppose, in a more simple term, I suppose, with reviewers and peer review, an editor is more likely to send your paper to peer review if they think it's got a good chance of reviewers agreeing to submit comments on it. If they're looking at an abstract and it doesn't look particularly considered, or maybe, maybe they do have a quick look at the paper and they don't feel that either the title or the abstract or the keywords reflect the paper, they may have concerns that reviewers might agree to submit comments on their paper and then realize halfway through reviewing it that it's not their niche and it's not appropriate for them to submit comments on, which can also extend peer review. So there's kind of lots of different aspects, everything that Regan just said, but just adding the kind of really focusing on the novelty of your paper, because we don't want to be duplicating publications and making sure that it may actually go to peer review and reviewers will want to take a look at it.
Thank you. We received a question. The first brave person on what are the most common mistakes that lead to rejection? How do you recommend balancing conciseness with providing enough background context?
I'm not sure whether you're sorry, could I just clarify? So the question was about how to kind of reduce the likelihood of your paper being rejected based on the abstract.
Yeah. What are the common mistakes like that you can see in the abstracts or the titles? It doesn't. It looks like it's not so interesting, or it's more probably you to get rejected, or like like you just see the title or the abstract and you reject right away.
Yeah. So I would say, bearing in mind most editor-in-chiefs are experienced in their field quite significantly, they're going to be able to tell quite quickly whether the terminology used is not appropriate for the field. They'll be able to tell whether AI has been used and kind of, the terminology that AI might use to describe something, or someone who's not who doesn't understand the field. They'll see the differences like that. So I would say try not to almost like recreate the wheel when you're using terminology in your abstracts and in your keywords. Use the words that are in use within the field. And that's not to say, for example, I know obviously there's various types of mass spec. So use the name and the terminology for the mass spec, whether that's the acronym and the kind of the full word version. But I think with leading to rejection, obviously the main things editors are looking for are novelty. They want to see that the methodology, particularly if it's original research, is solid, that it's kind of follows standard protocols, and everything to do with that. And also that it's just well written. Sometimes it can be, if an abstract and the wording isn't particularly great, it can indicate that the wording in the paper will not be as great. And I think it's kind of a common misconception that a lot of journals will rewrite the papers for you. It's very rare nowadays that you see a publisher copy edit all of your paper. So it is on the author, I suppose, to make sure that that wording is correct the whole way through and reads well.
Perfect. Do you want to add? Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Another thing that I will add is that when it comes to submitting your paper, very rarely, if ever, I come across a paper that's submitted that goes to peer review and all peer reviewers say it's immaculate, it's perfect, there's no changes need to be made. So very much, whilst you should put effort into writing your abstract title, keywords, and making sure your whole paper is accurate as possible, if you do get through the initial screening, it goes to peer review. You do always get that chance, typically, if your paper is novel, good quality, to make revisions. The peer reviewers, if they are interested in your paper, will recommend, oh, make this tweak here, make this change here, which again, typically does apply to the abstract as well. These are going to be experts in the field that may notice something that they think might be a bit questionable or they might not like, but a lot of the time they won't just say outright reject this. They will offer you with some constructive criticisms, constructive options that, yeah, as I say, very rarely people will always get it right the first time. And yeah, kind of the people that will be looking at it very much will differ in their approach to how they review something, how they look at a paper. So yeah.
Just realised there was a second part to the question, which was how do you recommend balancing conciseness with providing enough background context? Sorry for not answering that part. I would say think very much about your audience. If you're doing a very niche experiment or your research is very niche, then the reality is there's probably a small pool of people who are going to really understand what it is that you're doing. And therefore, I would target that, your abstract, your keywords based on who your audience is. So if you're going for like a really broad, I don't know, you want it to be interesting for people just broadly who are clinicians, say it's attached to a therapy area, say you're looking at Alzheimer's, you may decide to write a paper that is quite broad because you want people who are studying Alzheimer's or clinicians to also take your paper into account. However, if you're just targeting a very small group of people, say it is explicitly people working in proteomics on a particular protein, then within Alzheimer's, then you probably would go quite niche and quite, I suppose, direct with your keywords and your content of your abstract.
Yeah, I think that does just really come back to the kind of as yourself, once you've written your title, abstract keywords, reading through it and thinking very critically yourself, does this accurately summarize my paper? Would this, do I feel like if I, wasn't potentially as knowledgeable of this paper, of course you've written it yourself, would I need any further information? If you think, actually, yeah, if I could also have added this to the abstract, added this to the abstract, well then maybe just, making a few tweaks here and there to maybe some of the wording, maybe to kind of the content to make it so you can accurate, like kind of say yourself, yeah, I feel like this does not require any additional input. If I just read this abstract, I would be able to grasp overall. Like, I would be able to say, yeah, I know what this paper's going to cover.
Thank you so much. I have another question in the chat, but before we move forward with this one, I would like to do a follow-up question regarding this one, I think, because I mean, in some journals you have a really, really tight number of words that you need to fit in your results. And of course, we should select the most important ones. But since sometimes our field is really, really niche, that could be a problem. Maybe people doesn't understand so well and affect the impact of your paper or even pass to peer review after.
Uh, so I suppose just generally thinking about how, as you say, proteomics is a very niche field. When you're selecting keywords, I would think about specific things. So things like if it's original research, what techniques are you using? What methods are you using? What equipment are you using? What are people going to be most interested in? Are you looking at plasma, for example? Like there's kind of, I suppose, various avenues you can go down. What's the therapy area? Is it to do, like as we mentioned it earlier, is it Alzheimer's disease? Is it hepatocellular carcinoma? And just pulling out what you think is most interesting. I was doing a bit of reading actually around some of the keyword optimization earlier. And one of the things that comes up quite repeatedly is for a lot of journals, they're obviously indexed in PubMed and Medline, and they have their own almost tagging of papers within those systems. I think that's done like a couple of months after papers are submitted in PubMed. And there's certain terminology that they will tag, which makes a paper kind of come up higher in the search list. So, for example, proteomics is a word that would come up. However, maybe a really specific type of proteomics wouldn't. So I would say when you're thinking about your keywords, you can Google it and I can send around some information maybe that you can pass on to attendees about, I think they're called mesh terms. And basically, as I say, it's how they're categorized. So you may want to pick a mix of broad terms that you know will definitely be picked up in the indexing and some really specific terms that are targeted towards your audience. I think, again, it's just you really want to think about targeting your audience. I think that's what it always comes back to. So, like I say, if you're going for really niche areas, you want to be really specific about the techniques, the equipment, and so on, so that if you're targeting an audience who may want to replicate that methodology in a different area, that's probably what they're looking for in your paper, all of that, all of those kind of more specific keywords.
Yeah, thank you. Moving to the other question on this person. Thanks for your talk. your experience, the editor usually review the title and abstract to maximize the impact?
So yeah, with this is very much going to be a journal dependent kind of thing. So from my perspective, on the expert collection, Taylor and Francis, we are in-house editors. Our entire job is to work with authors to kind of help them make their work as impactful as possible, to reach out to the experts, to, ensure that they get good quality peer review comments, to actually look through and screen the papers that are coming in initially. So from my perspective, it is something that I like to do, is I do like to discuss with authors, kind of about the titles, about some of the keywords, maybe they're abstract a bit. But again, this very much does depend on the journal. Kind of the more you work in your fields, the more you will probably get a feel for different journals, for different editors that work for different journals. Like as I say, we're in-house editors. Other ones will be experts in the field that act as editors in chief for the journals that will be kind of working on the journal alongside their research, alongside kind of their day jobs as well. So they may not necessarily have the time to do this, but again, it's very editor specific of if it's something that they both feel comfortable doing and also if they do have the time for that as well.
I have nothing to add on that. Regan and I work in a very similar way, so that was a really comprehensive answer.
Yeah, we can take another question. How are editors looking at the use of AI as an assistant for writing manuscripts?
I think, well, that's a very broad question. I suppose we can only answer from the point of Taylor and Francis and specifically the expert collection. Um, I suppose is the question whether that's acceptable to use AI. I think from our perspective at this point in time, we allow it for improving grammar, but as you can imagine, it's extremely murky territory. Um, I think it's one of those things where we understand that AI is being used increasingly just in the world, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's appropriate for writing manuscripts. Obviously, the thinking behind it is we're looking for experts to write these papers, and although AI has access, I'm sure, to a whole plethora of papers, obviously, and the internet, I would say try and reduce your AI usage because if a paper looks like it's been written by AI, you're reducing your chances of it being sent through to peer review and considered.
Yeah, kind of on the basis of AI at Taylor and Francis, we do have kind of ever evolving guidelines on AI usage in papers. And one thing that I would add that particularly we do and like to have on the expert collection is if AI has been used, is just making sure it's disclosed, making sure the model's disclosed, just so people know it has been used. Um, because in that case, then also the editor is aware that it has been used, as opposed to if you haven't been clear, and potentially may not have used it, but the editor may be a bit suspicious of it. It just kind of allows us to kind of put our minds at ease if we know authors are disclosing it. And just kind of from a, I guess, like an ethical use point of view, and just from your, I guess, being secure with your work point of view, is AI cannot count as an author. It's something that is acknowledged, but it wouldn't count as an author. And as well, at the end of the day, any inconsistencies that come up with AI usage, it is kind of down to the authors to catch these. It's down to the authors to be responsible for these. So if there are any issues with potentially if it has hallucinated some information, it's changed potentially any of your figures, data, tables, and you haven't caught that. If that comes up later, then unfortunately you can't blame AI for that. It does come down to the authors, and the authors are responsible. So definitely best practice for what I would say is make sure you are, if you do use it, make sure you just use it in very small chunks of text at a time so that you can very kind of you can scrutinize that yourself with in quite some detail just to make sure that it is all correct, because unfortunately, like right now, authors are very much responsible for whatever the AI produces.
Yeah, that's quite important topic. Okay, I think that's all for today. Thank you for your attention and participating here today in our first webinar. And please stay tuned for our next ones during the year. Thank you so much to both Olivia and Reegan to be here today and share with us. It's really nice to have you in here. Thank you and bye. See you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much.